Welcome back to another very special Interview Wednesday here on Turnbuckle Trash Talk. I am the officiant, Kent, and we have with us today the fabulous Faboo André. First off, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
It's been a long time coming, and I've wanted to talk to you because we've seen a great evolution of your character, at least I have, over the past 2 years, starting with SXPW, and you were tagging there, and you kind of had the frilly coats. Now you've got the full makeup, the butterfly wings, and it's one of the most amazing things I've seen, amazing transformations I've seen in the indie scene. And some might look at what you do and think, oh, that's a very 21st century gimmick. That's not the kind of thing that would, get by in the old days. But the truth is, it does come from great inspiration from people like Adrian Street, Gold Dust. There's been artists who've done things like this throughout time, and it always seems to be effective. But I want to talk about the very, very, very beginning of your wrestling story. When did you first discover wrestling? Like, what's
discover wrestling as in my first memory? My first wrestling memory was actually my dad bringing home a sticker sheet that had Undertaker, Stone Cold, and The Rock on it. And I was just sticking it over everything in the house.
And when was the first time you actually watched wrestling?
There was a couple times that I remember watching it when I was younger, but there's no single time that I can pinpoint as the very first. I do remember the first show that I went to. It was a SmackDown at the Orange Dome, the one by Busch Gardens.
Oh, sure.
And I remember Rikishi and Scotty 2 Hotty being in the ring and bringing 3 kids down from the crowd, and I wanted to be down there so bad so they could do the worm. And Scotty 2 Hotty is the reason why today I know how to do the worm.
So you learned the worm specifically from Scotty 2 Hotty or just from watching him on TV?
From watching him, I wanted to do it, but
right.
I went to YouTube to learn how to do it.
Oh, of course, of course. So what made you decide, was there a particular person or moment or event that made you decide, I want to be in wrestling? I've got to have a career in wrestling?
I wouldn't say a particular moment, but the person who probably inspired me the most was The Undertaker. He was honestly like one of the first wrestlers that I ever liked, that I ever watched. I remember my brother also had a lighter that had Kane's mask on it. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world.
I had one of those.
And it just them being like larger than life. I always wanted to be so tall and powerful like them. And now I'm only like 5'8", 5'7", so.
You can only grow so high.
Yeah.
It seems like you were really particularly, based off of what you've said, drawn to people with really strong sense of character. You talk about The Undertaker. That's one of the longest running gimmicks you'd think would never get over. Like, if you really think about it from an abject point of view, you're like, he's a grave digger, an Undertaker in wrestling. How is that possibly going to work? And yet it's spanned 30 years now and is still going strong. Yeah. And then you talk about Kane again, like the idea of a guy in a mask who's obsessed with fire and all this other stuff. You'd think there's no way this is ever going to get over. And it totally did. What was it about strong characters that you took a liking to the most?
I think it was just that they were larger than life. It was something for me to look up to, that I could be. It really inspired me. It was something that I looked up to and I wanted to be as I grew up. It was my version of a superhero. I didn't read comics. I didn't play a lot of video games. It was like those were my superheroes, were Undertaker and Kane and all the wrestlers on TV.
One of the most interesting things to me, too, is how people get into training. Because I know, for me, growing up, there was no clear path to becoming a wrestler. Like, you really had no idea how to get involved unless you knew somebody who knew somebody, and you had those kind of connections. How did you discover your training, and where did you train?
I actually discovered it through a show that happened in my town. It was called Fighting for a Cure, and it was a benefit show for cancer. It was the second show or the third show, but I believe it was the second show. I went there, I stayed after the show, and I talked to one of the wrestlers. He told me about the WXW training center out in Kissimmee with the Wild Samoans, and he told me how much it was. He told me essentially where it was, how I could get in contact and everything. And I went up there, I checked it out. They told me how much it was. I got a job. I was only 17 at the time. I got a job, and I worked for a whole year, and I saved up money. I bought a car, and I had enough money saved up to start training there. And by the time I had saved up the money, Fighting for a Cure came back around. This was Fighting for a Cure 3. And I went back, said hi to Mark Boswell. He was the person who told me about it.
Sure.
And he introduced me to one of the people who was selling merchandise, Frank Reyes. And he told me he had his own training center that was an hour closer and $2,000 less. So I was...
Those are pretty good incentivizing
Yeah.
factors. What was it like training with Frank Reyes? What was the training experience like for you?
It was fun. Honestly, I went in there. It was mostly me and one other person, CMC. We trained together for months. We trained for a total of about 6 months maybe before he put us into our first match. And we had our first match together. We've come up together, and I have good memories of that place.
And it's interesting to see the places you guys have gone, too. I mean, you're both doing amazing things on the indies in completely different ways. I mean, you've been to Japan, for God's sakes. You've wrestled in Japan. Like, that in
Twice.
itself, twice, is a monumental thing. I want to ask you, though, what was the most difficult part of training for you? What did you find was the hardest thing to get down or get used to?
One thing I get told a lot, and this didn't happen until more recently within this past year, I was told I needed to be more aggressive. I have 3 older brothers, but I've never been aggressive. I've never been a fighter. I've never really been bothered by a lot of things. So being told to be more aggressive, that was honestly one of my hardest things to get over, because I just don't know how to be aggressive, really.
Sure, yes. You're not an aggressive personality. I always find you to be a very laid back, kind of go with the flow type of person.
Yeah.
But I've seen, personally, being your referee in matches and stuff, some of that aggression shine through, and I think it is bringing a brand new element to the character that you've formed. And it's really great to see that. What was the easiest thing for you to learn?
Probably the moves, because I've been watching it my whole life, that some of the moves, I have them in my head. It was really just learning the specific technique so that I didn't hurt myself.
How to
or
do
others.
it safely. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
But-
you can remember seeing them, like on TV, and they get burned into your memory, but there's always that little thing you don't know, that secret of how they did it so that they didn't kill themselves doing it.
I also had a trampoline in my backyard, so I was always practicing back there doing like shadow wrestling.
That's how the
and
Hardy
stuff.
Boys started, and you see where they are now.
Yeah.
So what was your first match like? Run me through that experience, because I've heard everything from my first match was great to absolute horror stories about their first match. What was yours like?
My first match was, I want to say a dark match, but it was a pre-show match on one of Reyes' shows. It was me and Sam C. I remember I was the heel, Sam was the face. I went out there. I didn't really know what to do. I was just kind of stone-faced. I tried to look angry. I went into the ring, and people were heckling me, and I didn't know what to say. I was really nervous, but we had gone through everything, and I knew Sam. I knew the referee. I knew what to do, so I knew it wasn't going to be, a botch fest or anything. But I just remember one of the fans, who still follows me to this day, was calling me Shawn Michaels. And
That's a pretty big compliment to get in your first match.
he was calling me Shawn Michaels because I had a hairy chest at the time, and I didn't know how to reply to him. I just looked over at him at one point, I pointed at him, and that was it.
Bad, no.
But my mom and my grandma and my brother were there, and it was overall it was a really good time, actually.
So how did you go from transitioning from that first match to becoming the Fabulous One Faboo André? Take me kind of through a shortened version of that story of the evolution of what you've become.
It was just, I was working with LPW, then circumstances out of my control. I started working for another company, SXPW, and at this point in time, I was only working once a month. I wasn't training very much because the school that I had gone to had shut down. So I was just kind of making the best of what I could with that once a month. Then they started up another promotion, Legendary Pro Wrestling,
Right.
which at this point I was still only working about once, maybe twice a month, and I was just getting frustrated. I didn't like it. I wanted to work more. I didn't feel like I was good, and I wanted to get better. And I just asked around what are the best schools in Florida, and I got directed to the WWN Training Center with Francisco.
Well, and the best wrestlers I've found never stop learning. They learn with every match. They learn with every opponent. And some of them learn by continuing to go to training, even though they're graduated and could just work shows. They still make that decision, and you're one of those people who's still training, still grinding. What is that experience like, and do you find yourself still learning, still adapting new things? Tell me about like what the training transition was like from Frankie Reyes to WWN and what you've learned along the way.
It was mostly a lot of timing stuff at the beginning. In wrestling, you're always told slow down. You're going too fast, slow down. You can always slow down. And even when I thought I was going slow,
you're not going slow enough.
I was not going slow enough. So that was one of the big things, just timing and learning to pace myself. And it also helped with my cardio being there. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to keep training, was because cardio. And that was honestly the biggest thing I've learned from him, was timing and pacing myself. And then Chris Silvio came in, and he helped me a lot. He's helped me a lot with character development, and also a lot of technique and more timing. And the same thing with Matt Sydal. He's helped me a lot with technique and learning new things and timing.
Well, and that's an all-star cast of coaches right there.
Yeah.
Francisco Ciatso, Matt Sydal, and Chris Silvio. Like that is so many different learning trees to learn under. What did you learn from each of them? Was there something specific that you kind of picked up? I mean, you mentioned character from Chris Silvio. What would you attribute to each of those coaches as being something that you've grown, or how you've grown as a performer?
Francisco has definitely helped. He definitely was probably the most with pacing myself. He showed a lot of he would get in there, he'd show a lot of character. He would pace himself. He would teach me how to not get blown up.
Way in the ring. Like, it seems like
he's very old school.
Yes.
So that's one thing I learned a lot from him, was just pacing myself and kind of working. And then Sydal has helped me a lot with moves, honestly. He's shown me so many different variations of arm drags and lucha things, and things that I can just incorporate and show when I need to, when I'm on that bigger stage and I need to show something that nobody else does.
Well, and he has a very stunning, flashy style. Like, he wasn't ever used for his character, I felt like. Even though I feel like the talent is there, obviously.
Yeah.
He can be a character. But especially in WWE, what got him over with fans was his moveset. And so it's good to see that he's still passing along that knowledge, because if anybody can catch your attention with the way they do things, Matt Sydal is a perfect example.
Yeah.
So all of this leads to you going over to Japan. What was that experience like, and how did it differ from wrestling in America?
Wrestling in Japan, it was... The crowd was much more respectful. They were quiet, but they knew when they needed to react. When we started clapping, they would clap along. When we did something big, they would cheer. It was... I don't want to say they were easy to control, but they understood.
No. Yeah.
They respected us. They knew to react when we did something.
I found a lot of fans in America kind of rebel against what the expectations are for them, like boo the heels, cheer the faces. There is such a no, I'm not going to. I'm going to boo the faces and cheer the heels, and almost like a childish rebellion in American crowds. But I agree with you, watching New Japan or anything, you'd think, oh, the crowd's silent, that's a bad thing, but it's not. It's all about respect, and actually I admire the Japanese crowds as opposed to more of the American crowds, because the
Japanese are always paying attention.
Yeah, they're watching the show. They're not on their phones. They're not messing around. They are observing and revering the art of wrestling. What made you decide to go to Japan? Was it just an opportunity that came up, or was it? How did that work out?
It was an opportunity. My mother has friends over there, and we had free room to stay with nuns. So she wanted to fly over there to meet them. She had never met them before. She met them through a game. And she told me, you're coming with me. You don't have a choice. So I asked around, saw if anybody knew anyone in Japan, and thankfully they did, and I got to meet some of the wrestlers over there. I got to meet a wrestler who used to wrestle in Florida, Ruji Walter, and Metanori Sawa, and they introduced me to a person who's now on AEW, Emi Sakurai,
That's awesome, yeah.
and I got to work for her promotion over there called Gato Move.
That's absolutely incredible. And then you got the opportunity to go back a second time. Was that again just, this is a good opportunity to do it? You had a chance, or did you actually get invited back? Like, how did that all work out?
Honestly, I just love the culture so much over there. Japan is amazing, and even like, I was thinking about it the other week, and I started missing it because it's just such a great time. Even when I didn't wrestle the second time I went over there, actually. I just went over there with a friend, and we experienced Japan. We went to different places. Then I went with my mom. We went to Osaka. It was just, I love Japan.
My question would be, is that the dream, to work for New Japan or one of the Japanese promotions? Is that kind of your end game? Because some people are like, yeah, I would love to work for New Japan, but WWE is the end goal. What's your end goal?
Honestly, my end goal would be to make a living overall.
That's a pretty good end goal, yeah.
But if I got the opportunity to work in Japan, if I got a contract and signed by a major company over in Japan, I would absolutely take it. I love Japan.
So I'm going to ask you the 4 questions I ask at the end of every interview. Number 1, what is your kind of feelings or observations about the wrestling landscape as a whole? We've got the Wednesday Night Wars going now. We've got promotions seemingly sprouting up everywhere. You can find all the wrestling on TV. What is kind of your feelings about the landscape?
I feel like it's honestly no better time to get into it. There's so many different avenues that you can go to make a name for yourself, to make a living and not even be signed. There are so many wrestlers out there nowadays who are just doing it. And people have a million excuses, but
Well, and there's something for everyone. That's the thing. Is like, if you don't like the way WWE does it, if you don't like the way New Japan does it, try Ring of Honor, try NWA, try AEW. Like, you're right, there's no excuse if you're even the slightest bit interesting to not find what you're looking for.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you're into the more hardcore stuff, CZW is still a thing. Like, they're still going strong.
There's a company in Florida, No Peace Underground.
Absolutely.
ARW, they do a lot of more hardcore stuff. There's companies all over the place, though, that do hardcore stuff.
What misconceptions or illusions did you have about wrestling when you got into it? You were like, oh, it's going to be this way. And then as soon as you started doing it, you were like, nope, that's not how it works at all. Like, an example would be like, I thought I'd make more money than I do. Or, I thought I'd get into WWE earlier. Like,
honestly, for me, the biggest misconception was probably that bigger names and people who are starting out were more separated. I thought there was a much bigger divide in people who had name power.
Like, you wouldn't think you'd cross paths with Matt Sydal or anyone like that. Yeah.
So that was probably my biggest misconception. And then I've ended up sharing locker rooms with people who I've seen on TV all my life. And it's like, this is crazy.
It's mind-blowing. And I think every good wrestler starts out as a fan. And so you don't want to have that mark moment, but there is still a part in your brain that goes, this is incredible. Like, I never thought this would happen.
I actually, when I was at Reyes's, Joe Malenko came in.
Legend.
And I was the only person in the ring. I was the only person in the school at the time. And he got in the ring and started rolling around with me because he had a show coming up. And at the time, I didn't think much of it. He was rolling around with me. I sat down. We finished training, whatever. I got in my car. I just thought to myself, wow, I got to roll around with Joe Malenko.
That's the coolest. Like, how many people can actually legitimately say that and have that as a memory and as an emotion and as an experience compared to everybody else?
Exactly.
Like, it's absolutely insane. What advice would you give to people who are interested in getting involved in the wrestling business? Not that they've started training. They're just thinking, man, I'd love to be a wrestler one day. What would you tell them?
Find a good school. That's one of the biggest things. If you start off in a good place, that can get you so far just right off the bat. That's probably the biggest thing that I would have looked for looking back on it. But other than that, just stick with it. Keep training. Learn as much as you can from as many different people as you can. You never stop learning.
No, absolutely. And I agree with you. Like, never think that you've got it, because I guarantee you don't. Like, I'm learning every single time as a referee, and some would think my job's pretty simple, but there's so much to it, and I'm learning every single time, and it's got to be twice as much, 3 times as much as a wrestler.
At some of the WWN seminars, they have the refs go in with one of the WWE refs, and even I'm not a ref, I've never reffed a match, but even just looking in and seeing what the refs have to do, it's interesting.
There's a lot more that goes into it than people think. It's not just counting to 3. What would you change about the wrestling business?
I would say there's just a lot of unnecessary drama between certain people, and it doesn't need to be there. I was honestly homeschooled for high school, so I've never had to deal with a lot of drama in my life. So when I see things around, I just stay out of it. But that is probably one of the biggest things that I've noticed is there's a lot of just unnecessary drama.
A lot of ego that comes associated with this. And I mean, being a pretty testosterone-fueled sport, that has a tendency to inflate those egos and cause that angst to grow even stronger. But I agree with you. I'd like to see us all work together. That's just really what it is. At the end of the day, we all need to work together to put on a good show. Teamwork is key, because even as small as in a match, you have to trust who you're facing, because your lives are literally in each other's hands. And if you can't trust the person across the ring from you, how can you possibly trust that this is going to be a good match or safe? Now I want you to go forward in a segment we call Take It Home, which was named by Tony Stabile. I want you to plug anything you want to plug, your social media, companies or promotions you like to work for. Maybe not necessarily shows, because this may air in like 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But go to town.
Well, I have all of my social medias are under the same name, at Faboo André. I have Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, a like page and a personal page. I will not always accept friend requests if I do not know who you are. No hard feelings.
Just go to the like page.
Just go to the like page.
You can't miss out on the like page.
Yes. One of the promotions is Bar Wars in Clearwater, Florida.
Excellent.
Run by Chris Silvio. And
check out the WWN Training Center.
Check out the WWN Training Center. That's always a good place to learn.
Become a star like Faboo André.
Right here at the Gulfview Event Center.
Yes, learn from the likes of Matt Sydal and Chris Silvio and Francisco Ciatso.
Yep.
And all the other great coaches and guests that they bring in. Anyway, Faboo, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you,
Best
Kent.
of luck going forward. We're definitely going to have to check in a few months to see how things are progressing.
Of course, I look forward
to it. And thank you guys for checking out another Interview Wednesday here on Turnbuckle Trash Talk.